Grace and peace. I'm Brian Moss, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Bible Study. The peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. And this is our very last video on the book of Amos. We have been studying and journeying through the book of Amos for the last 10 weeks, and this is week 10, the good news and the bad news. We will be looking at restoration here. And in the previous video, we got this hint that maybe not all Israel is doomed for this judgment. This hint becomes the main focus for the final couple of verses in the book of Amos. Restoration. Let's read those verses together. In that day, I will restore the fallen booth of David. I will repair its gaps, restore its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that are called by my name. This is the Lord's direct declaration. He will do this. Hear this, the days are coming. This is the Lord's declaration, when the plowman will overtake the reaper, and the one who treads grapes the sower of seed. The mountains will drip with sweet wine, and the hills will flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people. They will rebuild and occupy ruined cities, plant vineyards and drink their wine, make gardens and eat their produce. I will plant them on their land, and they will never again be uprooted from the land I have given them. Yahweh your God has spoken. So just to kind of highlight this restoration from verse 11, it's actually interesting that fallen booths of David or fallen tent of David will be restored. From that verse, developed a rabbinical name for the Messiah called the Son of the Fallen. I just think that's fascinating. And the idea that word booth there or tent is the Sukkot, which is or the Sukkah, which is the booth or the tabernacle or the tent that is celebrated during the festival of Sukkot, which is coming up, which was kind of a traditional Jewish feast and festival that honored their wanderings in the desert, which was brought up earlier in the book of Amos, asking them if they worship God in the desert. But it was also the sign of the humbling of the nation of Israel, because they didn't always have the land. They didn't always have houses. These houses and lands were gifts given to them by God. So the festival of booths, or this tent of David and the fallen tent of David, it's kind of this reminder of just the restoration that could be possible, because Israel once were slaves in Egypt. They wandered the desert in tents. They are now in pretty nice prosperity, but even if that prosperity is taken away by judgment, they can be restored, and the fallen tent of David will someday be restored. But that idea of the Messiah being the son of the fallen, that's something to just kind of think about for a while. The restoration includes all nations. You saw a reference to Edom, which is one of the nations judged way back in chapter 1, and kind of concluding with Edom being brought back and brought into restoration with this nation of Israel. And then all the nations are going to be part of that restoration process. And it's interesting to note that James quotes this in the book of Acts. When the question of whether or not Gentiles should be let into the church, James, in an answer to that, quotes these verses. And it's a little bit different. It's coming from the Septuagint, or maybe even an interpretation of the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. So Hebrew translated into Greek, and then James speaks it from that, and then it's recorded in Greek and written down from what he said as well. Then James saying, and the words of the prophets agree with this, as it is written, after these things I will turn and rebuild David's fallen tent. I'll rebuild its ruins and set it up again, so the rest of humanity may seek the Lord, even all the Gentiles who are called by my name, declares the Lord who does these things, known from long ago. So this passage was key in the early church's understanding of what it means to, one, restore Israel, but as Israel is being restored, let the Gentiles into that restoration as well. So then the second half of these verses talks about this beautiful, beautiful picture of just Israel being able to live in the land, make produce, eat that produce. What does that future kingdom look like? And think through that. What would have to be true for verses 13 through 15 to come true, to come to pass? Politically, these people would have to be at peace with the nations around them. Agriculturally and climate, there can't be like fire and famine and drought and locusts and plagues. It has to be a stable, peaceful, shalom-like climate. Socially, throughout the book of Amos, we see even when the poor were able to grow things, it seems like the rich were taking those things away from them. Theologically, this was going to be a shalom, a peace, the presence of the Lord. Faithfulness and blessing of God was upon this people. So this idea that is presented in 13 through 15 of this peaceful restoration of Israel would have to have a blessing of God upon them. And that blessing would deal with so many of the things that Amos talks about, how they would be at peace with the other nations. They would not have these curses of drought or famine or locusts upon them. And the society itself would have to be working well so that people were eating the produce of their own land and not having it taken away from them by the upper class, by the wealthy, by the king, by the rulers. It would just be basically a good shalom, peaceful, everything working the way it should be. That's the picture that Amos ends with. This idea that kind of the narrative arc, you sinned, God's bringing judgment, but after judgment always, always hope is in that judgment that there could be eventually restoration. And Amos ends with a picture of that restoration. So just as a review, some of the main points coming out of the book of Amos. Yahweh is God over all the nations, including Israel. Although Israel holds a special relationship with God, that special relationship means they are more accountable to God, not less. Worship and justice are absolutely connected. Economic prosperity, political peace are not necessarily indicators of righteous living. God's silence is a scary possible judgment. Don't tell the prophets of God to be quiet, where God might just listen. And restoration is always the end goal. Those are some of the major themes in the book of Amos. I hope you really enjoyed walking with us through this book. If you have other themes that you want to bring up, other comments about the book of Amos, drop them in the comments section below. I would love to hear from you. I enjoyed having this conversation with you. Moving forward, the next series of Bible studies we'll be doing will be kind of what we believe, actually a theological about the 8, from my perspective, most important beliefs in the Christian faith. And we will be examining those in kind of a different way. That will start mid-September, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Hopefully you can join us for that as well. As always, there are two ways to join the conversation: live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time via Zoom, and these weekly wrap-ups on YouTube, WordPress. I'm all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Those links are in the description below. I've really enjoyed walking through Amos with you guys. I hope to have a conversation with you again real soon.